This is an introduction to something we've been building together, a shared language for communities that want to last. It is not a product, not a methodology, and not a movement to join. It is a written blueprint, freely readable, that names the parts of community life that almost always go unspoken and gives words to the parts that almost always go wrong. We'll spend the next 20 minutes walking through what it is, why it exists, who it's for, where it's running today, and how you can pick it up. Let's start somewhere honest. If you've ever been part of a community that fell apart, a co-living house, a project collective, an intentional village, a neighborhood association, you've probably heard the same explanation. Someone got difficult. Someone changed. Someone wasn't really committed. We want to gently push back on that. Many things can break a community. Illness, money, founders leaving, external pressure, plain bad luck. But people being broken is rarely the real story. 3 things almost every collapse has in common. First, the rate. Somewhere around 80 to 90% of intentional communities fall apart within a few years. That number isn't something we measured ourselves. It's the figure that comes up again and again across community researchers, practitioners, and postmortems. We're quoting it, not claiming it. Second, the failure points are remarkably consistent, the same handful of patterns, across very different communities. And third, what almost never broke was the original vision. The vision usually held. What didn't hold was the scaffolding around it. One of the biggest reasons they fall apart is that the systems holding them together were never made explicit. There are many reasons communities collapse, and we are not claiming to fix all of them. We are naming one, the one that keeps showing up, that is almost always preventable, and that almost nobody writes down in advance. Here is what tends to stay vague until it hurts. Power, informal leaders override formal processes, and charisma quietly becomes authority. Money, what's commons and what's private blurs, contributions go unrecognized, treasury rules drift. Conflict, there's no repair path, so disagreement turns personal and gets avoided until it explodes. Exit, there's no defined way to leave, so people either stay too long or simply vanish. Memory, the patterns live in a few people's heads, and the community resets every time one of them moves on. And decisions, authority quietly accumulates, and outcomes start to feel arbitrary. Each of these is preventable. None of them are usually addressed in advance. So we wrote it down. Not as a methodology, not as a course, not as something you have to buy into. A written specification, freely readable on the web, that names the parts of community life that need to be made explicit and offers patterns for each one. You can read it in an afternoon, disagree with whole sections, take what fits, and put the rest back on the shelf. It lives at Blueprint EcoHubs, Community. The acronym is RCOS, the Regenerative Community Operating System. We use the word system in the technical sense, a set of explicit rules, interfaces, and test cases, not as a synonym for bureaucracy. RCOS is open, readable, and forkable. There is no install step, no platform to log into, no token to buy. You can literally run it on paper, with pens and a notebook, and most of its early adopters did exactly that. Here is the honest boundary. RCOS is an open, written specification, a layered set of patterns and constraints, modular so you can adopt a piece or the whole, forkable so every section is reviewable and replaceable, and tested in a real community under real conditions. It is not software you install. It is not a token or a coin or anything tradable. It is not a fixed ideology or the right way to live. It is not a replacement for human judgment. And it is not a lifestyle, a belief system, or a cultural identity. You can run it on paper. There are 4 kinds of people who show up here. If you want to help shape the blueprint, read it carefully, disagree with chapters, propose changes, the work needs more hands. If you're already in a community and one part of it keeps breaking, pick the matching layer, work on it, and leave the rest alone. If you're starting a community, you don't have to spend a year discovering the same problems other groups have already solved. The templates are a head start. And if you're just curious about human structures, about how groups stay coherent and how power stays visible, you can read it as a study object. All 4 are welcome. None of them are more correct than the others. 4 moments when it's useful. Starting, you're forming a new community and you want to make the invisible explicit on day 1. Repairing, one part of your community keeps breaking, and you want to fix that part without rewriting the whole thing. Studying, you want a shared vocabulary for comparing communities and the patterns they break on. And holding authority explicit, when a group already shares strong values and wants to make sure those values can't be quietly turned into tools of coercion. A short note on motivation. Implicit by default is the default mode of community failure. The same 6 or 7 things keep going wrong in different communities across decades because nobody wrote them down in advance. We made RCOS because the body of practical knowledge already exists in scattered form, in books, in retrospectives, in informal lore, but it had never been gathered into a single readable specification that a small group could pick up and use. So we did that. RCOS is built by the EcoHubs community. EcoHubs is an open, online community co-creating a living blueprint for regenerative intentional communities, combining ecological wisdom, transparent governance, and practical systems design, and testing what we publish in real communities running it. There is no single author. The blueprint is shaped by its members, and it gets better with every careful reader, every disagreement with a chapter, every experiment, every honest report back. That's deliberate. A specification with one author is a personality cult in a longer document. There is one rule that runs through every layer of RCOS. Nothing essential may remain implicit. If something can remove someone's rights, bind someone's time or labor, control shared resources, silence dissent, or prevent exit, it must be explicit, documented, and reviewable. No exceptions. That is the entire ethic in one line. Everything else is mechanism. 5 principles shape every part of RCOS. First, constraint-based, not value-based. It defines what must be written down, not what you should believe. Values vary. Constraints are what keep systems functional under stress. Second, pre-commitment over improvisation. Decisions about power, money, and conflict are made before the moments that usually distort them. Third, modular by default, a stable core, plus optional domain modules you can add or remove. Fourth, human scale, optimized for groups of roughly 5 to 150 people, where trust doesn't need bureaucracy. And fifth, failure tolerant, not failure blind. It assumes conflict, burnout, and mistakes will happen and writes the recovery path in advance. RCOS is organized into 7 layers. Each layer answers exactly one question, and higher layers can't override lower ones. The structure matters less than the principle. When you can name which layer something belongs in, you can address it without disturbing the rest. We'll walk through them in the next few slides. 7 layers from identity to evolution. Layer 0, identity and scope. What is this community for? Layer 1, membership. Who is inside, on what terms, with what rights and obligations? Layer 2, governance. How decisions are made, with which authority, at which threshold. Layer 3, economy. How value flows, what's commons and what's private. Layer 4, conflict and repair. What happens when things break, who handles it, and how? Layer 5, operations. How daily life and work actually function. And Layer 6, evolution. How the whole thing changes safely in the open. Layers 0 through 3. Layer 0 defines identity and scope, a single primary purpose, an explicit list of what's governed and what isn't, and invariants that even consensus can't override casually. Layer 1 defines membership, how people enter, what they get, what they owe, how they leave. No implicit members, no one trapped, rights and obligations symmetrical. Layer 2 defines governance, decisions are sorted by type, with explicit authority and matching threshold. Decision risk matches decision method. And Layer 3 defines economy, contributions are recognized explicitly, commons stays commons, the treasury is transparent, and money can't quietly become power. Layers 4 through 6. Layer 4 covers conflict and repair. Conflict is handled rather than avoided, power asymmetry is acknowledged honestly, repair comes before punishment except in safety-critical cases, and safety overrides participation. Layer 5 covers operations, roles are defined, operational knowledge is documented so it doesn't live only in people's heads, time and attention are treated as finite, and information access rules are explicit. Layer 6 covers evolution, change is possible but constrained, versioned and traceable, reversible where possible, and learning is captured, including the failures. Systems that can't change either rot or explode. If you remember one line from Layer 2, let it be this: match decision risk to decision method. A small reversible operational choice does not need the same process as a constitutional change, and a constitutional change should not be made the way you decide what's for dinner. Most community dysfunction comes from collapsing those two, either bureaucratizing the trivial or trivializing the constitutional. This single line, applied honestly, prevents a lot of pain. A quick honest note. We know the word framework can land badly when it arrives uninvited, especially for people building communities precisely to escape institutional thinking. So we'll be specific. Each layer of RCOS is a template, something you adopt and adapt. Nothing in here prescribes what you believe, how you live, what you eat, who you love, or what you grow. It only asks that the things that almost always break in communities be written down before they break, in your own words, your own context, your own culture. You can take the whole stack, one layer, or none of it. You can fork any template, rewrite it, and feed your version back into the standard. That is the whole interface. Beyond the 7 layers, RCOS has modules, optional extensions for specific domains: land stewardship, education, housing, alternative economies. A module doesn't change the core, it just adds explicit shape to one domain that has become critical for your particular community. You'd reach for a module when the domain has become central to survival or identity, when informal practices are starting to create ambiguity or power imbalance, when conflicts keep coming back around the same area, or simply when the community has the capacity to support more structure. A module never overrides a core invariant. If it tries to, it isn't compatible. There are 6 modules in the current scope. 2 are written and usable today: the full permaculture module for communities where land stewardship is mission critical, and the minimal permaculture module for small groups of 3 to 15 people who want ecological grounding without the full apparatus. 4 more are in scoping, education, housing, land commons safeguards, and alternative economies. Modules grow as the community contributes them. If a domain matters to you and isn't covered, that's an invitation to help write it. RCOS isn't validated by good intentions. It is validated by stress tests, scenarios written from real community collapses that we've studied or lived through. Dominance in meetings. Founder veto power that lingers even after the founder formally steps back. Commons becoming private through repeated use. Conflict avoidance becoming the dominant culture. Charismatic or spiritual authority quietly replacing structure. Emergency rules becoming permanent exceptions. A community is only RCOS aligned if it can hold up against these scenarios without resorting to informal fixes. That's the bar. This is what the work is doing in one frame. Implicit power becomes explicit roles, defined authority named decision rights. Implicit values become scoped rules, your values stay yours, but their operational consequences are written down so they can't be quietly reinterpreted. Implicit punishment becomes due process, with repair before sanction and predefined safety overrides. And implicit ownership becomes declared rights, commons protections, and transparent treasury logic. The result isn't more bureaucracy. Counterintuitively, it's less, because the implicit version was always more rigid, just invisibly so. Here is how you actually apply RCOS in 6 steps. First, read it and locate yourself, which layers are already explicit in your community, which are implicit, which are completely missing. Second, adopt what fits. Partial adoption is the norm, not the exception. Third, adapt to your context, translate the templates into your land, your culture, your stage of life. Fourth, run it and stress test it, apply under real conditions, and note where it bends, breaks, or surprises you. Fifth, document openly. What worked, what didn't, what hurt. Failure is the most useful thing the network has when it's shared honestly. And sixth, feed it back. Your lessons become proposals, version notes, and new templates for the next community to read. This is the shape of the whole project, built as a loop, not a launch. Every community that picks RCOS up and runs it teaches the next one something. The blueprint isn't finished, and that's the point. It gets better with every careful reader, every disagreement, every honest report back. We're not trying to release version 1 and walk away. We're trying to keep the loop spinning. RCOS doesn't only live in a document. There is a first RCOS pilot, a real community, applying the standard under real conditions, with all the texture and friction that implies. We want to be careful with words here. FruitHaven is the first community to adopt RCOS. It is not a pilot eco-hub or an eco-hubs-built eco-village. It is an existing community that picked up the standard. That distinction matters. The first RCOS pilot is at FruitHaven in Ecuador. FruitHaven is a pre-existing community, complex, with long-standing divisions, deeply committed to healing, that adopted RCOS version 0.1 in March 2026. Not as a solution, but as a shared language for the work ahead. A short note from inside the pilot. A community member put it this way: the introduction of RCOS sparked renewed motivation and inspiration within their community. We share this carefully because the blueprint doesn't magic away the pain. It does something quieter. It names the thing that's hard and gives the community a shared language to work on it together. The pilot is already feeding additions back into the blueprint. 3 concrete examples. First, federation. What happens when a community crosses around 150 people, or when a community simply wants to split, for reasons of conflict, geography, or different human groupings? The blueprint is still missing clear answers on how those subcommunities differ from each other in their decision-making, their membership, their values, and their accountability. That work is in progress. Second, attributes. We've noticed that some things aren't well described as a state or as a role. Roles tend to read like jobs. Land ownership, for instance, may need a third semantic primitive, an attribute, attached to a person or a place with its own rules. And third, minor fails. RCOS has an escalation ladder for the big things: repeated harm, structural violations. It doesn't yet have one for the small, repeated infractions. Somebody who keeps skipping the agreed communication channels, somebody who keeps forgetting to log their work. We're scoping a minor escalation path now. Real friction becomes a named gap, becomes a proposal, becomes the next iteration of the blueprint. This is how RCOS fits the bigger picture. The EcoHub's vision is small, place-based communities, each adapted to its land and culture, woven into a shared commons that gets stronger over time. The whole thing is one 3-part loop. A shared standard, RCOS, that any community can pick up, real communities applying it under real constraints, and learning feeding back into the standard, so the next community starts from what the last one already learned. The vision is the why. The blueprint is the first thing you can hold. That's the introduction. 3 doors are open. You can help develop the blueprint, read it carefully, disagree with chapters, propose changes. You can apply a single layer in your existing community, starting with the one that's actually breaking. Or you can start a new community on the templates and tell us what you learn. Whichever door fits, the work needs more hands, and the loop only spins because real people keep turning it. Thank you for listening.